Welcome to this edition of Michael's Weekly Perspective Podcast. This is podcast episode 64. In this podcast, I'm going to give you an update on what I have been doing during the past 2 months, and then at the end, I'm going to share with you some highlights about my former school, which is the Georgia Academy for the Blind. That's all for this edition, and stay tuned. Hello, it's so great to be back with you on this edition of Michael's Weekly Perspective Podcast. This is podcast episode 64. If you would like, you can get hold of this podcast by sending an email to me at munnmichael68@gmail.com. That's munnmichael68@gmail.com. Or you can also call using the listener line. And the phone number is 404-923-0115. I hope you are enjoying your summer thus far. It's been a long time since I produced any show. There had been a lot of things I have been doing while I was taking a break from producing the podcast. One in particular was I graduated high school on May 25th, 2022. Me, along with 14 other graduates, had walked across the stage that officially ended our high school career. On June 9th, I made a trip by myself from Atlanta to Baltimore to see my best friend that I wasn't able to see for 2 years because of the global pandemic. This was a great experience for me because I never flew on an airplane by myself once. Every time when I fly, I usually fly with other people. And this was also the time that I have to come over my fear of flying on an airplane by myself. I really despise flying on an airplane. While I was in the Atlanta airport, the airport agent put me on a wheelchair as we requested for special assistance to guide me to TSA. I think they have lack of experience. When the assistant showed up, she came with a wheelchair in front of her. At first, I didn't want to get on it, but they were already there, so I have no choice. At that point, I also do not have time to argue with them because I don't want to face the risk of missing my flight. Besides the wheelchair problem in the airport, the rest of the trip from Atlanta to Baltimore was a success. I was in Maryland for 2 weeks. In addition to me making a solo trip from Atlanta to Baltimore and back to Atlanta, I also acquired a new piece of technology, and that is a 14-inch MacBook Pro 2021 edition running the M1 Pro chip. This is a great technology, and for the past 4 weeks, I have been putting all my effort into learning this device. I have been using Windows all my life. I can remember ever since I started using a computer back in 2010. Some commands on the Mac is very similar to the Bluetooth keyboard commands on the iPad. In addition to learning all the keyboard commands on the Mac by myself, there are also some new keys that I have to get familiar with. They are Command, Option, FN, and Control. I'm familiar with the FN and the Control key because they can be found in Windows as well. The main keys that I have to get familiar are the Command and Option. These two keys, the Command and Option keys, really challenged me a lot. When I first got the MacBook, and after I got it set up, I had the tendency of performing the Windows command on the Mac, and vice versa. What caused me wanting to get a Mac was in 2020, when I just moved to Georgia and I attended the local high school in DeKalb County. In the computer lab, they were using PC and Mac at the same time for this course that I'm taking called Music and Technology. Back then, I know as a matter of fact that Mac OS is accessible for people who are blind and vision impaired. But back then, I don't know how to use a Mac because I didn't learn how to use the system when I was in Virginia. And that had really held me behind. Because I don't know how to use a Mac back then to complete my assignment, I have to wait for a person from the high school to show up in the computer lab and make the Windows computer accessible. Even though there is a Mac that is already accessible, I had made a goal to learn how to use a Mac. And since I graduated, while I still have time before I go to Minnesota, why don't I learn a new piece of technology? And that's the whole reason why I got the Mac. In addition to me wanting to try out a new system, there are 2 advantages that I have been really enjoying ever since I started using the Mac. One in particular is typing in Chinese without have to setting the entire computer to Chinese. All I did was adding a keyboard for that language, and the next thing I do is start typing. One other advantage that I've been really enjoying is using GarageBand for free. There is a program that is equivalent to GarageBand in Windows, I think, but they might cost a lot of money to buy it. So using a Mac had enabled me to use GarageBand for free. As of right now, I am not in that level where I can tackle GarageBand by myself yet, so I think in the future, I will be familiar with GarageBand on the Mac, just like I am this comfortable with using Audacity in Windows. At the beginning of this podcast, I shared with you I graduated high school and the Georgia Academy for the Blind, GAB. Since I graduated, I can now talk about the school based on my 2 years of being a student there. Georgia Academy for the Blind is the only school for the blind in the state of Georgia, so they serve students from all over the states. The school itself is a residential school, so most of the students live there. We return on Sunday and live there Monday through Thursday, and then go home very early at 1 o'clock every Fridays. There are a lot of things that I really like about GAB, and there are also things that I really don't. And one thing that I don't like about GAB is the food quality. Because GAB is a residential school, and they have to serve 90 plus students, the staff who work in the cafeteria at GAB really do not have time to make enhancement to the food. So that is totally understandable. In addition to food not tasting as good as they supposed to, the teachers are also nice to the students. I still remember in the past, if I see a teacher when I was in China, I would get very panicky. That's because teacher serve as an authority figure in my heart. But in GAB, I don't have to do that. I especially remember while I was a senior at GAB, I had my social study teacher 3 times during the 2nd semester, and that was a bless. Because I really liked the class and the teacher who teach the class as well. She is from some part in Georgia, and one thing that I remembered her clearly is that she is obsessed with cats. And of course, her name is Miss Angela Touchton. I had her for U.S. history, economics, and U.S. government during the 2nd semester. She, of course, is the only social study teacher in the high school level at the Georgia Academy for the Blind. Besides serving as a social study teacher, Miss Touchton is also a leader of this club called the Social Science Club. This is an after-school program that occurred every Tuesday of last school year. In this after-school program, we learn about stuff that isn't covered in the curriculum. For example, we learn about history from different era by listening to music from different times. In addition to listening to music from different times to learn about different historic events, we also learn about festivals around the world and how people celebrate it. There is one example that I remembered clearly was during February of this year. We were learning about Mardi Gras celebration. To show us about Mardi Gras, Miss Touchton actually cooked us Cajun meals. Those food include jambalaya and king cakes. We also listened to the documentary, how people celebrate it. It was a pretty good experience. Beside Miss Touchton, there is another teacher that I need to give a special shout out to, and his name is Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins is a math teacher at the Georgia Academy for the Blind in the high school level. Thanks to him and his team, most of our senior activities were able to be held successfully. I am not a fan of math classes, but I am a fan of Mr. Collins when he was giving us advice on what should we do as a senior class. Beside Mr. Collins, there is one last person that I need to give a special shout out to, and his name is Mr. Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds is a director of the residential program at GAB. Whenever we want something, all we need to do is send him an email, and within a week or so, we got a request fulfilled. This was a great thing, and he remembered everybody's birthday, so during the time that a person's birthday is coming up, he would usually leave a surprise for that student. This was a great thing for me because this has changed my belief on how should a school operate. When I was in China, we learned that school is a place for learning, thanks to him and all his teams for making the residential program at GAB great. So those are my highlights about the Georgia Academy for the Blind, and I hope you liked this program. And this is it for this edition of Michael's Weekly Perspective Podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to send an email to me at munnmichael68@gmail.com. That's munnmichael68@gmail.com. You can also give me a call at 404-923-0115. That's 404-923-0115.